What happens when one of television's most uncompromising hosts meets a royal duchess who's grown accustomed to softball questions and fawning interviews? You won't believe what unfolds when Bill Maher's legendary sharp tongue collides head-on with Meghan Markle's carefully crafted public persona in what started as a seemingly innocent late-night appearance but quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive confrontations in television history. The stage was set for disaster from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the real-time set, her polished smile masking what would soon reveal itself as thinly veiled contempt for anyone who dared question her narrative. The audience welcomed her with enthusiastic applause, completely unaware they were about to witness a masterclass in how privilege and entitlement can crumble under the weight of uncomfortable truths. "Welcome to Real Time, Meghan," Maher began with his characteristic wry smile, settling back in his chair with the confidence of a predator who already sensed weakness in his prey. "I have to say, it's refreshing to have someone on who's actually lived the fairy tale that most people only dream about." Meghan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, but her media training kicked in immediately. "Well, Bill, I think that's exactly the kind of oversimplification that creates problems. The reality of my experience has been far more complex than any fairy tale narrative." "Complex," Maher repeated, savoring the word like a fine wine. "That's one way to put it. Another way might be to say that you married into the most privileged family on earth, and then spent the next few years complaining about how hard it was." The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden drop in temperature. Meghan's practiced composure began showing its first cracks as her jaw clenched slightly. "I think you're missing the point entirely, Bill. This isn't about privilege or lack thereof. This is about basic human dignity and the right to tell your own story without being silenced by an institution that—" "Oh, silenced?" Maher interrupted, leaning forward with the gleam of a shark who'd just tasted blood in the water. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've been pretty vocal. Oprah interview, Netflix series, podcast deals, all books. If this is what being silenced looks like, sign me up." Meghan's media-trained mask slipped further as genuine irritation flashed across her features. "You're deliberately mischaracterizing everything I've said and done. The institution I'm referring to has a documented history of protecting certain members while throwing others under the bus, particularly women of color." "And there it is," Maher said, sitting back with satisfaction. "The race card. I was wondering how long it would take." The audience gasped audibly, and several people could be heard murmuring their disapproval, but Maher pressed on relentlessly. "Look, I'm not saying racism doesn't exist, but when you're living in palaces and being waited on hand and foot, maybe the oppression meter isn't quite hitting the red zone." Meghan's eyes narrowed dangerously, her carefully modulated voice taking on a sharp edge. "Are you seriously suggesting that wealth and status make someone immune to racism? Because that's not just ignorant. It's actively harmful to millions of people who experience discrimination regardless of their circumstances." "What I'm suggesting," Maher replied, his voice taking on that familiar tone that regular viewers knew meant he was about to deliver a particularly brutal observation, "is that maybe, just maybe, when you're complaining about your terrible life from your mansion in Montecito, people might have a hard time relating to your struggles." The tension in the studio was now palpable, with audience members visibly uncomfortable and production staff exchanging worried glances. Meghan straightened in her chair, her royal composure battling against obvious fury. "I never said my life was terrible. What I said was that I experienced treatment that was dehumanizing and dangerous to my mental health. But apparently, according to you, having money means I should just shut up and take it." "I'm not saying shut up," Maher countered, clearly enjoying himself as he sensed his guests' growing agitation. "I'm saying maybe have some perspective. You know what's really dangerous to mental health? Being one of the millions of Americans who can't afford health care or housing or education, not having to curtsy to your grandmother-in-law." Meghan's laugh was bitter and sharp, cutting through the studio like a blade. "You know what, Bill? This is exactly the problem. Every time someone tries to speak about their experiences, there's always someone ready to minimize it, to say that someone else has it worse, to suggest that privilege should equal silence. Or maybe, Maher shot back, his voice rising with excitement as he sensed the kill approaching, maybe some people are just professional victims who figured out that playing the oppression card is more profitable than actually doing anything meaningful with their platform. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and for a moment, the entire studio fell into stunned silence. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, and then pure undiluted rage. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles went white, and when she finally spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. "Professional victim?" she repeated, each word dripping with venom. "Is that what you think this is? Some kind of performance for profit?" "If the tiara fits," Maher quipped, but this time his joke fell flat in the hostile atmosphere he'd created. The audience was no longer uncomfortable. They were actively hostile, with several people booing outright. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair rolling back with such force it nearly toppled over. "You know what, Bill? I came here thinking I was going to have an intelligent conversation with someone who understood nuance and complexity. Instead, I'm sitting across from someone who's apparently spent zero time actually listening to anything I've ever said, and has decided to regurgitate the same tired talking points that have been weaponized against me for years." "Sit down," Maher said, but his usual confidence was wavering as he realized the interview was spiraling completely out of his control. "We're not done here." "Oh, we're done," Meghan replied, her voice now carrying the full weight of royal authority mixed with California steel. "We're more than done. But before I leave, let me make something crystal clear to you and your audience." The cameras continued rolling as the confrontation reached its boiling point, with neither host nor guest showing any signs of backing down. Meghan's voice cut through the studio like a razor blade, each word precisely calculated to inflict maximum damage. "You want to talk about professional victims, Bill? Let's talk about a man who's built his entire career on punching down at people who can't fight back on equal terms. Let's talk about someone who hides behind the guise of comedy to say things that would get anyone else canceled, but somehow thinks he's above reproach because he calls it politically incorrect." The audience erupted into a mixture of gasps and scattered applause, clearly divided on whether they were witnessing brilliant television or a complete disaster. Maher's face flushed red, his usual smugness replaced by genuine anger as he realized his guest had just turned his own weapons against him. "Oh, that's rich, coming from someone who's made millions crying about how mean the British press was to you," Maher shot back, abandoning any pretense of civility. "You want to know what punching down looks like? It's a millionaire duchess complaining about her life, while actual working people are struggling to put food on the table." "There it is again," Meghan exclaimed, her voice rising with righteous indignation. "The same deflection, the same refusal to engage with the actual issues. You cannot discuss racism. You cannot discuss institutional abuse. You cannot discuss anything of substance without immediately pivoting to, but other people have it worse. That's not argument, Bill. That's intellectual cowardice." The studio fell deadly silent at the word cowardice. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in instinctively, capturing every micro-expression on Maher's face as he processed what had just been said. His legendary quick wit, usually his greatest asset, seemed to desert him momentarily as he struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't make him look even worse. "Cowardice?" he finally managed, his voice strangled with rage. "Lady, I've been saying things on television that would make most people wet themselves. I've taken on presidents, dictators, religious fanatics, and every sacred cow in America. Don't lecture me about courage from your ivory tower in Montecito." "And yet," Meghan replied with deadly calm, beginning to pace behind her chair like a prosecutor addressing a jury, "when faced with a woman of color trying to explain her lived experience of racism and institutional gaslighting, you immediately retreat to the same tired playbook. Minimize, deflect, and ultimately silence. You're not brave, Bill. You're a bully who's gotten comfortable picking on targets you think can't hit back." The production team was frantically signaling to go to commercial, but both Maher and Meghan were too locked in their verbal deathmatch to notice or care. The audience was completely riveted, some filming on their phones despite the clear no-recording policy, sensing they were witnessing television history in the making. "You want to know what your real problem is?" Maher said, leaning forward with venom dripping from every word. "Your problem is that you thought you could waltz in here and get the same softball treatment you get everywhere else. You thought you could spout your victim narrative without anyone challenging it, without anyone pointing out the massive contradictions in your story." "What contradictions?" Meghan demanded, whirling around to face him directly. "Please, enlighten me. What part of my story doesn't add up to your brilliant analytical mind? How about the part where you claim you knew nothing about royal protocol, but somehow managed to execute a perfect curtsy to the Queen in your first meeting?" Maher said, his confidence returning as he sensed he'd found a weakness. "Or how about claiming you were unprepared for media scrutiny after spending years as an actress in Hollywood? Or maybe the part where you say you were suicidal but couldn't get help from the same institution that provides world-class medical care to every member of the royal family?" Each point hit like a physical blow, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Meghan looked genuinely shaken. But rather than retreat, she seemed to draw strength from her anger, her voice becoming even more controlled and deadly. "You want to dissect my trauma like it's some kind of intellectual exercise?" she said quietly, her words carrying more menace than if she'd been shouting. "You want to play amateur psychiatrist and tell me what I should or shouldn't have felt during the darkest period of my life? Let me ask you something, Bill. Have you ever been in a situation where asking for help could destroy not just your life, but the lives of everyone you care about?" "Don't try to psychoanalyze me," Maher snapped, clearly rattled by the shift in dynamics. "This isn't about my experiences, it's about your credibility. No, this is about your inability to empathize with anyone whose experience doesn't match your narrow worldview." Meghan fired back. "You sit here night after night, pontificating about subjects you've never lived through, dismissing people whose struggles you can't comprehend. And then you wonder why you're becoming increasingly irrelevant to anyone under the age of 50. The age comment hit home visibly, Maher's face contorting with rage as he realized his guest had found his own vulnerable spot. "Irrelevant? Lady, I've been doing this since before you were even acting in cable TV movies. Don't lecture me about relevance when your own career peaked with a supporting role on a legal drama. At least I didn't build my career on being deliberately offensive and then hiding behind it's just comedy when people call me out." Meghan shot back without missing a beat. "At least I'm trying to use whatever platform I have to actually help people instead of just tearing them down for entertainment." "Help people?" Maher laughed bitterly. "What exactly are you helping with? Making documentary films about how hard your life was? Starting a lifestyle brand? Please, enlighten us about all the good work you're doing from your mansion." The audience was growing increasingly restless, with several people standing up and some actually starting to leave. The tension in the room was becoming unbearable, but neither combatant showed any sign of backing down. If anything, they seemed to be feeding off each other's anger, escalating to levels that were making everyone else deeply uncomfortable. "You know what?" Meghan said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper but somehow carrying clearly throughout the stunned studio. "I think we've all learned something very valuable here tonight. We've learned that when some people are confronted with perspectives that challenge their comfortable worldview, they don't engage intellectually. They attack personally. They minimize, they deflect, and they reveal exactly who they really are underneath all the clever rhetoric." Maher stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "And what we've learned about you is that you can't handle even the mildest scrutiny without playing every victim card in the deck. Race, gender, mental health, institutional oppression. If you've hit every talking point, except alien abduction." The studio erupted into chaos as audience members began shouting, some supporting Meghan, others defending Maher. Security staff began moving closer to the stage, clearly preparing for the possibility that the situation might escalate beyond verbal sparring. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most explosive television confrontation in recent memory. But as the chaos swirled around them, both Meghan and Maher remained locked in their stare-down, two immovable forces about to collide with devastating consequences. The moment stretched like a taut wire ready to snap, with the entire studio holding its collective breath. Then Meghan broke the silence with a laugh that was both bitter and triumphant, a sound that somehow managed to cut through all the background noise and command absolute attention. "You know what the most pathetic part of this entire exchange has been, Bill?" she said, her voice carrying a finality that made everyone in the studio freeze. "It's watching someone who supposedly champions free speech and challenging authority figures become so threatened by a woman who refuses to be intimidated that he resorts to the exact same tactics he claims to oppose." Maher's face went from red to nearly purple, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Threatened? By you? That's the biggest joke you've told all night. And trust me, the competition has been fierce." "Yes, threatened," Meghan continued, her composure now ironclad while Maher visibly struggled to contain his rage. "Because what you've realized tonight is that I'm not going to shrink. I'm not going to apologize for existing. And I'm certainly not going to pretend that your decades of experience give you the right to dismiss my truth without consequence." The audience had gone completely silent now, sensing that something climactic was about to happen. Even the production staff had stopped their frantic signaling, recognizing that whatever was unfolding was bigger than their show's format or commercial breaks. "Your truth," Maher spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "That's the problem with people like you. You think having an opinion makes it sacred, untouchable, beyond criticism. Well, here's some truth for you. Just because you've experienced something doesn't mean your interpretation of it is automatically correct, or that the rest of us have to accept it without question." "And there's the real Bill Maher," Meghan said with devastating calm. "Not the fearless truth teller, not the brave comedian speaking truth to power, but just another middle-aged man who can't handle being challenged by someone he assumed would be easy prey. You thought you could ambush me with gotcha questions and cheap shots, and when that didn't work, you resorted to personal attacks and character assassination." "I don't ambush anyone," Maher protested, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "I ask tough questions that other interviewers are too cowardly to ask." "No, Bill, you don't ask tough questions," Meghan replied, moving closer to his desk with predatory grace. "You ask loaded questions, designed to trap people in sound bites you can mock later. You don't want dialogue, you want dominance. You don't want understanding, you want submission. And when you don't get it, you throw tantrums like the one we're witnessing right now." The precision of her words was surgical, each sentence carefully crafted to inflict maximum damage while maintaining the moral high ground. Maher seemed to shrink slightly with each accusation, his legendary quick wit completely deserting him in the face of her controlled fury. "You want to know what's really rich?" Meghan continued, her voice rising with righteous anger. "You built your entire career on being the guy who speaks uncomfortable truths, who challenges conventional wisdom, who refuses to bow to political correctness. But the moment someone turns that same energy on you, the moment someone refuses to be your victim, you can't handle it. You fall apart completely." "I'm not falling apart," Maher said weakly, but everyone in the studio could see that he absolutely was. His usual cockiness had evaporated, replaced by the desperate flailing of someone who had completely lost control of the situation. "Aren't you?" Meghan asked with mock concern. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're having a very public meltdown because a woman dared to stand up to your bullying. Is this what passes for intellectual discourse in your world? Personal attacks, victim blaming, and then falling apart when someone fights back?" The studio erupted again, but this time the energy was different. The audience was no longer divided. They were witnessing a masterclass in how to dismantle a bully, and many were openly cheering Meghan's performance. Several people were on their feet applauding, while others were shouting their support. Maher looked around desperately, seeming to suddenly realize that the crowd had turned completely against him. His show, his studio, his audience, all of it had been conquered by his guest in the span of a single disastrous interview. "This is exactly why no one takes you seriously anymore," Meghan said, delivering what everyone could sense was her final blow. "It's not because you're too edgy or too controversial. It's because, underneath all the posturing and provocation, you're just another insecure man who can't handle being challenged by someone who refuses to play your games." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Maher opened his mouth several times, but no sound came out. His famous razor-sharp wit, his decades of television experience, his reputation as an unstoppable force in late-night television, all of it had been reduced to nothing by a woman who had simply refused to be intimidated. "And with that," Meghan announced, straightening her jacket with deliberate precision, "I think we're done here. Thank you for proving every point I've ever made about how women, particularly women of color, are treated when they dare to speak their truth in public forums." She turned toward the exit, then paused and looked back over her shoulder with a smile that was both gracious and utterly devastating. "Oh, and Bill, next time you want to ambush someone on your show, maybe pick a target who isn't smarter than you are. It might save you some embarrassment." The studio exploded into chaos as Meghan walked toward the exit with the poise of a queen leaving her throne room. Some audience members were on their feet cheering, others were booing Maher, and still others were simply sitting in stunned silence at what they had just witnessed. Maher finally found his voice, shouting after her retreating figure, "This is my show! You don't get to just walk out! We're not finished!" Meghan stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back one final time, her expression one of almost pitying condescension. "Oh, we're finished, Bill. We were finished the moment you decided to attack my character instead of engaging with my ideas. The only question now is whether your career can survive what just happened here tonight." With that, she disappeared into the wings, leaving behind a studio in complete pandemonium and a host who looked like he had just been hit by a freight train. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of Maher's visible shock and the audience's wild reactions. Production assistants scrambled to restore order, while Maher stood frozen behind his desk, still processing the complete destruction of what was supposed to have been just another routine celebrity interview. The great Bill Maher, legendary destroyer of careers and sacred cows, had been systematically dismantled by his own guest in front of millions of viewers. As security escorted the most vocal audience members out, and the remaining crowd gradually settled into an uncomfortable murmur, one thing was crystal clear. This would go down as one of the most spectacular television disasters in history, and Bill Maher had been on the wrong end of it entirely. The confrontation was over, but its reverberations would be felt far beyond the walls of the real-time studio, marking the night when one of television's most feared interviewers finally met his match and discovered that sometimes the prey fights back harder than the predator ever expected.